Relax this summer
with podcasts from your favorite shows
on primemediaplus.com.
So my guest for the next conversation, and this is particularly on the appointment of Advocate Andy Mothibi to the position of National Director of Public Prosecutions, is Dr. Suhayfa Bhamjee, and she is from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, UKZN Law. She's a senior lecturer in criminal justice, and she's on the line. Dr. Bhamjee, good morning. Thank you so much for your time.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me.
You know, I just want to start with just the significance of the fact that the advisory panel that was appointed by the president to do these interviews for the position of National Director of Public Prosecutions said that they could not find a suitable candidate for the NDPP role. What do we make of that? Especially because there seem to be rather strong candidates on the panel. We had a Hermione Crinier, who's been in the investigating directorate as its head, the current head of the ID, as well as a previous NDPP in Menzi Smelane.
Yeah, so that's a great observation, and I think you've made some interesting links there. I think us watching from the outside, and certainly those of us from the legal fraternity, I don't think you have to be from the legal fraternity really to be able to identify who stood out. But I think it also all comes down to what the panel were actually looking for. What sort of mandate were they given in respect of who to choose? That certainly wasn't made clear to us. I mean, we've asked previously, what are you looking for? Are you looking for a manager? Are you looking for a CEO? Or are you looking for a doer, mover, and shaker? And it's not clear what that was. But there's also something positive to be said if you go through this process and you find that someone or there's no one appointable based on the criteria that have been identified, then it does take a strong space to say we weren't able to identify anyone. But, that also comes with its own challenges and perhaps a rethink of how we approach the appointments of the NDPP in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I suppose, the question then becomes, what does the NPA need currently? Because it does need a mover and shaker. It does need someone who gets the job done. And it also needs a leader, someone who will be able, to implement the strategies that they always speak about in terms of prosecutorial strategy. And I suppose the president believes that Andy Mothibi is that man.
Yeah, I think the president's drawing on Mothibi's experience with the SIU, but as a number of other commentators have said, the SIU is sort of a different animal and a different beast from what's required at the NPA. There may have been successes in the SIU, but it's a bit of a different beast. Yes, Mothibi's got prosecutorial experience and being an advocate of the High Court, etc. But we do wonder what's the challenges to come. And then just to build on what you said is, if you've got a strategy and a plan, we also want it to be able to play out in that you'd have sufficient time to do it. Concern for me is that Mothibi is already in his 60s. I'm not an ageist here. I'm not being ageist, but he's in his 60s. And the thing about the NDPP is that you serve a 10-year term or retire at the age of 65, whichever comes first. So depending on, is that enough time to clean up, to get your plans in place and perhaps even have a succession plan built in? I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose maybe that points to the, maybe he's being required to hit the ground running, and start making changes immediately. But what type of an NPA is Mothibi walking into? I think many of us have been rather critical of the institution, under the leadership of Advocate Shamila Batohi. But we also saw some of the candidates who were being interviewed for this position also being very critical of the organization and its systems.
Yeah, and look, that's important. Some of the, if you look, much of the questions from people we chat to is about, well, how do you deal with capture cases and major fraud and corruption cases? But for the average Joe on the ground, it's about, well, how do you deal with the robbery case? How do you deal with the rape case? And how do you deal with the theft, on the ground types of crimes? So I think it is fair and certainly, in a sense, encouraging for those candidates to admit, yes, there are problems. I think we'd have bigger issues if what is appointed or the person who is appointed is someone who says, no, everything's hunky-dory and we're going fine. And I suppose that's in Mothibi's favor, in that he's been critical of the NPA and its slowness and things like that. Maybe he'll be able to speed things up and, like we said, get things shaking.
Yeah.
I mean, if he, from the outside, like us, have identified that these are problems, maybe now that he's in that space, he'll make something happen. But again, I am concerned about that time frame.
We're speaking about the appointment of Advocate Andy Mothibi, the presidency, making that announcement last night, and he's going to be leading the NPA as the National Director of Public Prosecutions. The term for Shamala Batoyi comes to an end at the end of this month, and thereafter Mothibi takes over, and we have the COO of the SIU, who's going to be the acting head of the organization, and now that Mothibi has been, moved to the NPA. And I'm speaking to Dr. Suhayfa Bhamjee, who is a senior lecturer in criminal justice at the University of KwaZulu-Natal Law. Dr. Bhamjee, I think there's been a lot of questions around the way that Mothibi was appointed. We know that the president there's no obligation on the president to have an interview process, even though he has decided to have one. Just speak us through the appointment itself. I read an article that, Mothibi was asked to almost throw his hat in the ring. Should we be concerned about the way that this appointment came about?
Well, look, I think even if someone wasn't asked to let's just talk about throwing their hat in the ring. The way I probably read the same article. The way I've sort of understood it or interpreted it is that he was asked to consider it, and the way I read it was that maybe others, the way it sounded like maybe others were also asked beyond the six after the panel was not able to put any names forward. So that's something we need to think about, which will go back to what we said a little bit earlier about probably a legislated, more formalized process for these appointments. But legally, I think the president has done what's within his constitutional mandate and gone that way. I mean, again, the panel interviews and that very public process was a step certainly in the right direction towards transparency. But now, again, we're falling backwards where it seems to be like a gap in transparency with this type, the way the appointment has been made. And that's just optics, really, from my side in that respect. It can still be tested, and it will be tested, obviously, as time goes by on Mothibi's suitability in the role once they're in the role. And I think perhaps that could be said true for any even of the six who were interviewed, if any of them were appointed.
Yeah.
But I legally there was no issue. It's just this thing about transparency which we've been trying to get to grips with. But I mean, there's no legislation for that. So perhaps what we're looking towards again for the future is how do we make these appointments, and should we have a more formal process?
You pointed out something really important and significant around the difference in the beast that the NPA is. The fact that he's been so successful at the SIU and was able to be, to also show the public the work of the SIU and justice not just being done, but also justice being seen to be done. Just let's analyze the difference into what he's walking into at the NPA. I mean, there's been allegations of dysfunctional justice system, and an NPA that's just struggling as an organization to carry out its mandate. Is this something that we should be worried about for Mothibi, who comes from an organization that was working like a well-oiled machine and now moving into an NPA, which really isn't?
Well, there's two things there, right? The first thing is this was going to be a challenge for anyone. The NPA's role, the NDPP role, is going to be a challenge for anyone. Right? Let's start there. There's a lot to clean up. yes, it's a different beast, but maybe, as you said, maybe what Mothibi can bring to the party is that same clarity, that same get things done attitude, translate that into the NPA. We'd hope certainly for that sort of translation, but only time will tell. But there's a lot to do. I mean, there's a lot of, learning new faces, learning new spaces, new personalities, and getting to grips with what needs to go, what needs to stay, and what needs to change. So yeah, it's quite a tall ask.
We're speaking to Dr. Suhayfa Bhamjee, who is Senior Lecturer at UKZN in Criminal Justice. Get in touch with us. The number to dial for you to weigh in on this conversation is 072, or rather, that's the WhatsApp number, 072-702-1702. And if you'd like to give us a call, 011-883-0702. Let's take a voice note.
Kgomotso, good morning. One wonders that if the president wanted Advocate Mothibi, why didn't he appoint him in the first place instead of the public interviews that other candidates had to go through? And Mothibi was never interviewed, and voila, he is now a newly appointed NDPP without being interviewed. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look good to some of us, and of course the candidates who had to go through the interview process. Anonymous.
Thank you for that voice note, Anonymous. Doctor, my interpretation yesterday when I read the statement was not that the president always had his sights on Mothibi. What I thought was, the panel said or found that none of the people who appeared, even though some of them seemed rather strong and promising, they didn't believe were eligible. And then the president went out looking for someone else, and that's when Mothibi's name came up. Is that the sense that you had as well?
Well, I think that's probably leading in the right direction. I mean, the person, Anonymous, who left the voice note does say, well, why didn't he apply in the first place? And that's probably because he wasn't interested. He felt busy and, secure and settled in what he was doing at the SIU. And when no names will be able to be put forward, I suppose the president reached out to him to say, look, this is something that needs to be done. And that's probably where it came from. I mean, it is a bit of a reshuffle, I suppose. But only time will tell how that works.
And is Mothibi's appointment an indictment on the current state of leadership capacity within South Africa's prosecutorial and legal system? The fact that, we don't have a candidate outside of a candidate that's already doing so well in a different organization to appoint to this really important position.
That's an interesting word, indictment. I don't know that it's an indictment on the legal profession itself. Perhaps it's rather an eye-opener as to what people of caliber, people who might be particularly capable, are actually able and willing to do. There's a number of challenges with the NPA, so politics aside. There's things like tenure, security of tenure. I mean, the NDPP must retire at the age of 65 or 10 years, whichever comes first. And, what's the longevity there? More mature people in this role probably only start coming into their own later in their careers with much more experience. So it does then also cut that down. And if you're talking about people who are in private practice for themselves or at firms, it's not very, enticing, salary-wise, politics-wise, to make this transition. I won't even say it's a lateral transition. It's not even an upward transition in very many practitioners' eyes. And then again, if you're talking about criminal law experience, do we have that? When they were talking about the question about how many people have you managed in an organization. Practitioners don't really manage organizations. They're either practicing for their firms, or they're running sole practices, or they're advocates and they're running themselves. So that's quite a challenge. And if you were to critically look at those forms of criteria, if I was looking at myself versus those criteria, I'd probably discount myself completely. And very many, I think majority of the legal practitioners in the country would do so because of that executive leadership criteria.
Yeah. And just to reflect a bit on, the work of Advocate Shamila Batohi and the legacy that she leaves. I mean, she's leaving an NPA that really does still seem embattled, which is concerning, and I think it's rather sad considering the fact that she was appointed to almost clean up the organization.
Yeah. Look, I think she did try. I don't. But it's just that it's not visible, and it's certainly not felt. There've been a lot of things that have sort of opened up in the last 2 years, 3 years. We do appreciate that what Shamila Batohi inherited was a broken system. But the question that we would probably have to reflect on is, did she at least try to mend it, or is it now more broken? I don't know.
Yeah, because that's the difficult question that one would have to answer. Just speak to us about what do we think the work that Advocate Mothibi should be prioritizing going into this. With Batohi, it was very clear that it was state capture cases and high-profile matters that she had to start with. And I think as a result, that's why we saw her starting with the Cato Manor and Johan Boyson's matters, prioritizing those quite a bit. With Mothibi now going in, what would that look like for him?
Well, I mean, yeah, I think if we look at time frames, he's got to decide which case or cases he's starting with. Obviously, it's not just about any particular case. His mandate as the NDPP is not just to look at particular types of cases. It's an overhaul of the entire of the NPA as an organization and as a system. But if we want to single out and begin with these high-profile, we call them high-profile corruption cases, then the question certainly is, well, which one? I mean, logically, I don't think you can try and do everything all at the same time. I think you'd have to have a strong confidence in a litigation team for that, or certainly for any of the ones, but decide which 1, 2, or 3 he's going for, what the time frames are, and what his strategy is for that. I don't think you can, I mean, you have to ask, how do you eat an elephant? It's one bite at a time. I don't think it's realistic for anyone to say, I'm going to do it all. Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah. And what would be a realistic expectation that South Africans should have of Advocate Mothibi as he begins his work?
Well, I think realistically, I think what we do want to see is clearing up of the rot, really, answering the hard questions. We want transparency, and we want to see results. We want to see results rather than stalled processes, and due to prosecutorial inadequacy, unpreparedness, etc. We want to see the wheels actually turning, but not just turning inevitably. We also want to see the end goal and the finish line.
Let's leave it there. Dr. Suhayfa Bhamjee, Senior Lecturer in Criminal Justice at UKZN Law. Thank you so much for your time.